You're listening to Mentoring Developers. Does it matter what kind of language you learn, or just learn as much as you can? Don't worry about what type of language it is.
I think there's different classes of languages that are good for different types of problems. And I think it's good to get experiences with the different types of languages. You learn a systems programming language. You could go and learn C, but now there's Rust, right? So if I was looking into learning a systems programming language, I probably wouldn't go and look at C. I'd probably go and look at Rust. If I'm looking for something that's more dynamic, you could go to the Ruby route, you could go the Python route. Pick one. I wouldn't necessarily say, well, you have to learn both. But then that could be just my personal preference, because I've never really been able to grok Ruby. Python I don't mind too much, but Ruby is just one of those things that rubs me the wrong way. I don't know, but again, it's strange. Like things like XSLT, I think is fabulous. I love using XSLT, and many people just can't stand it. So there's definitely a personal preference that goes into that. I love SQL. Writing SQL queries. I've written so many SQL queries over my career, and I think it's fabulous because it's the declarative nature of both XSLT and SQL. It's really nice. You don't have to worry about going and mentally traversing through loops and worrying about state. It's like you're just making a statement about this is what I want the output to be when this is what the input is. So there's a really nice simplicity to that. I'd love to get the opportunity to spend more time working with something like F#, because I think that's a nice blend. It's a functional language that fits well into the ecosystem that I already know. And I've played around with tutorials a bit, but you need to really have a project that you need to deliver, or I do. I need to have something that I really need to deliver to force me to work on something regularly for it to stick. If I just tinker with tutorials and walk through tutorial, I can walk through the tutorial and by the end of it, I've kind of forgotten it. I had the opportunity at RunScope to do a little bit of work in Go, and Go felt very natural for me. And I was able to write some stuff in it, and that I like that. The one nice thing about Go is the environment that you work in is really nice. It's just really easy to get set up. It's easy to take on dependencies. It's easy to compile and test. It's not so easy to debug, but just because the tooling isn't there yet. But it's a great example of having a fairly constrained, or at least having a recommended configuration set up so that everything just works. So that was a really good experience for me. But my early years of experience were with more kind of database tools, because my objective was to build database type applications. So I started with the Foxborough for DOS, and I moved to Foxborough for Visual Foxborough, which was Microsoft's first object-oriented language. And then I moved on to Visual Basic 6, going against SQL Server as a backend, and then slowly transitioned between Visual Basic 6 and C#. And C# has been my main staple for the last 10 years, although I still do support applications running in VB6. I have
my commiserations.
Production application. You know what? I really don't mind going back into that code.
Wow.
Because the thing about VB6 is it did some, one of the things, it was way better than Visual Foxborough in that Visual Foxborough allowed inheritance and was dynamic. And you could get yourself into a complete mess, because you could go into some base class somewhere and make a change, and you wouldn't find out for weeks in production that you had actually really screwed something up somewhere else completely different in the application. Because going back to when I was working on that, the idea of unit testing frameworks, they weren't there, right? Very few people built extensive amounts of unit tests. And with the dynamic language, I think it's a critical thing that you have really good unit tests testing your stuff to allow you to change. So when I moved into VB, we had no inheritance. We only had interfaces. But interfaces solved the vast majority of the problems that I needed. And you can follow a lot of the same principles, that we're doing, the whole MVC, MVP, model view presenter type patterns. I was doing that stuff in VB6 because it just kind of evolved naturally out of the type of decoupling that I needed to do to make the user interfaces that I was building manageable over time. So there was a lot of horrific code written in VB6 with UI controls. Actually, probably UI control vendors were probably the source of a lot of the thing. Again, it comes back to, we have this wonderful tool. Just install this tool, and it will do everything for you, and it will make it really easy. But maintaining that stuff was a nightmare. But you can write fairly clean Visual Basic code, and I know that I can go back into, it's an application with probably 600, 700,000 lines of VB6 code, and I can fairly comfortably go into that and make changes, add new fields to screens, add new elements to the database, and I wouldn't have a big concern doing that.
Let us know how we are doing by tweeting at us at Mentoring Devs. And if you are enjoying the show, give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. Now, let's get back to the show.
That's great. I think that one of the reasons is that you're the original author, so
yeah, that does help.
You have the layout in your head, and also, I mean, you're using the MVP pattern. You can have these patterns in any language, but the language doesn't support it, so you have to write a lot of boilerplate. And so if everybody agreed on a pattern, and so we're going to do this type of development in VB6 or C++ or whatever. If everybody agreed on that, and I could go into a code base and I would know where things should be, how they should be laid out, and I can spot a mistake because it sort of stands out if it's a little bit off.
Yeah.
But the problem with these types of languages, which don't really go on with convention, frameworks rather, like Ruby on Rails or ASP.NET MVC or other frameworks like that, they want you to follow a convention so that you don't have to write a lot of boilerplate, which I think is the point of this. You can certainly do everything in VB6 or any other language.
For show notes and transcripts, visit us at mentoringdevelopers.com.